Here is absolutely everything that you need to know about Project Hail Mary before the movie drops. I'm talking full breakdown, full spoilers, character analysis, the works. Everything that you're going to need to walk into that theater and pretend like you've read the book whenever you actually haven't. Although, if you're asking me, you should in fact read the book.
Please state your name.
Ryland Grace. I spoke up from a coma. I'm several light years from my apartment. And I'm not an astronaut. I'm not an astronaut. I'm not an astronaut.
Hi, hello, welcome or welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Cece, and if you enjoy bookish commentaries, reading vlogs, all things bookish, this might just be the place for you. And if you're just looking for a summary to watch before the movie comes out, that's okay too. I'm still here for you. If you don't already know, Project Hail Mary is a science fiction book that was released in 2021 by Andy Weir, who also wrote The Martian, which also earned the very famous movie adaptation. PHM has earned a huge following, with fans falling in love with the suspense, the high stakes, the sarcastic commentary, and everyone's favorite little alien, Rocky. The movie is set to release March 20th, and if you don't have time to read it before then, or if you just don't want to, I'm going to take you through everything you need to know, starting with just a broad summary to set the scene. Project Hail Mary starts with Ryland Grace, who is a middle school science teacher, by the way, waking up in the middle of space with no idea or memory of how he got there. He wakes up attached to feeding tubes with a computer care system taking care of him, seeing to his essential basic needs, and his two crewmates are dead next to him. And as his memories slowly return, he learns that he is on a desperate mission to save all of Earth from a deadly extinction level catastrophe, an alien threat that is slowly draining energy from the sun. Humanity has tried and failed to find another solution, and this is the last chance. The stakes literally could not be higher, because if Ryland is unable to succeed, Earth is going to enter another ice age, which will result in war, famine, and essentially the end of all humanity and life on Earth. He is cut off from all communication, most of his memories, and he has a limited food supply. He must piece together not only the purpose of his mission and the solution to the problem, but he has to figure out a way to survive long enough to actually complete it. At its core, this is a science-driven survival story about making do with what you have and working under pressure. It is also much, much deeper than that. It explores memories, responsibility, sacrifice, and an unlikely friendship, and it balances this with humor and optimism, making this high-stakes scenario feel oddly hopeful. Now, if that did pique your interest, you can go ahead and leave now, no hard feelings, but if that didn't make you want to read the book, then keep watching for the full breakdown. I'm gonna go through all of the main plot points in order, and we'll take time to do a deeper analysis, go into character development, and why I think that this story matters more than ever right now. So, as we already established, Ryland Grace, or Grace as he's most commonly referred to as throughout the book, wakes up alone in this lab, doctor's office-esque room. He has no clue where he is. He's connected to robot arms. His crewmates are dead around him, and he has no memory. The robot arms and computer system are there to monitor the basic necessities and needs of the crewmates, to feed them, to change them, and to basically keep them alive. And whenever he first wakes up, the first task that he is faced with is remembering his own name. Without this basic question, the robot basically won't let him move or leave the room that he's in or do anything, pretty much. Keeps him locked out of most systems and heightens our senses that something is terribly wrong here. But, you know, I guess it makes sense, because the guy who can't remember his own name probably shouldn't have access to a full spaceship at the moment. Throughout the story, and particularly in this first part where we're still setting the scene, his memories come back to them in flashbacks. He's able to recall the astronomical mystery that is known as the Petrova line, which is an infrared streak that stretches all the way from the sun towards Venus. And a Japanese solar probe is able to confirm that with this line, the sun's energy is dropping at a very consistent rate, which is terrifying. And back in the present, Grace is able to run a few experiments, and he realizes that 1, he is not on Earth, and 2, him and his crewmates were placed into medically induced comas, likely because they were on some kind of long journey. And knowing how dangerous comas are, he comes to the conclusion that this is why his crewmates are gone, and he faces the reality that he is truly alone in space. We also learn that the Petrova line is made up of a microscopic alien species that is unidentified. And despite this huge catastrophe level mystery going on, humans do what they always do, and they just continue life as normal. Just because the sun is losing energy and we might reach an ice age in 20 years doesn't mean that life doesn't continue on in the meantime. He's also able to remember a little bit of his life before the mission. He realizes that he was a middle school science teacher, and he chose this career path after his academic career kind of collapsed around him due to his controversial paper arguing that life could exist without water. It's this very same hypothesis that draws Eva Stratt and the Petrova task force to connect with Grace, that is able to reveal the truth that these unidentified microorganisms are feeding on the sun and causing stars all across the galaxy to dim. Through his research, Grace is actually the first person to be able to study the samples collected firsthand, and he confirms that they are living anhydrous organisms that use light for movement and energy. He decides to call them astrophage, which roughly translates to star eater, which is very fitting, obviously. And back in our present timeline, he's finally able to recall his name and access more of the ship. As Grace explores more of the ship, the Hail Mary, he remembers more of his mission and more of his purpose. Sent to Tau Ceti, which is a nearby star that is in the path of the Petrova line, but for some reason is not dimming like the rest of the stars in the galaxy. The mission is both simple and desperate, with no clear path forward. If Tau Ceti is immune to astrophage, maybe somehow whatever immunity it has can be replicated and sent to the sun in order to save Earth. And he remembers that the mission itself was built around astrophage. These tiny organisms actually produce huge amounts of energy and are able to store them quite efficiently, making interstellar space travel actually possible. Survival was absolutely never guaranteed, and this whole entire mission was built on a prayer. In the present day, Grace takes inventory of the ship and discovers the Beetles. They are small probe crafts meant to carry data and samples back to Earth, and slowly he starts to accept the truth that he has been avoiding, and that is that this was never meant to be a round trip. This is in fact a suicide mission. Now, as the Hail Mary is slowly making its way towards Tau Ceti, Grace detects something that he is convinced is impossible, and that is another spacecraft. And at first he just assumes that it's debris or a malfunction, and in true Grace fashion, he builds a formula to keep track of its movement, and we learn that it is in fact a spaceship, and it is moving very deliberately in his direction. Actual alien ship is here, orbiting the same exact star at the same exact time. He labels it Blip A and attempts to make contact using basically Morse code, light signals, and engine pulses. And at this point, the tension is so thick because neither one of them knows the other's intention. We don't know if this is hostile or friendly or who could possibly be waiting on the other side of that ship. All we know is that we are alone, far from home, and that if this is a potential ally, that could change everything. Eventually, the ships are able to communicate very slowly using what essentially is some kind of metal pod transporting 3D messages back and forth. What we later learn is that the alien inside is completely blind. He has no eyes at all in his structure, and he operates using a sonar radar kind of similar to bats, but even more fine-tuned. So he uses these tiny little sculptures made of metal in order to communicate so that he can actually see the messages being sent back and forth. Now, after a little while of back and forth communication, they make a plan to actually meet face to face. This requires a ton of coordination and a lot of engineering experimentation. Something that I thought that was really cool is that whenever they first make contact, there is a huge wall made up of all these different kinds of metal, all in varying shades of pretty much brown, and there's one clear window pane. And once Grace realizes that there's a window, he of course walks up to it and tries to peer through. And all we see is basically this huge rocky arm situation, and he is very understandably freaked out. They part ways, and whenever he comes back, he finds that the whole wall is now made of glass. Now, like I said, our alien friend doesn't have any eyes. He operates based off of sonar, so he can actually see through walls. But of course, Grace, being a human, cannot. He needs glass in order to be able to see. And the reason that there was this mismatch of all these different metal options is that the alien was trying to see which material Grace preferred to build the wall out of. And I just thought that that was kind of very thoughtful, and it also makes a lot of sense because an alien with no sight is not just going to accidentally stumble across the one material that humans can see through. I thought that that was a really fun, nerdy scientist mini experiment. It kind of gives us our first glance into the thoughtful creature that we are dealing with. Now, once Grace is actually able to see Rocky, he realizes that he is a massive spider-like creature who appears to be made of some kind of rock-like substance, which is how he gets his nickname Rocky. He is dense and is meant to survive in high pressure and ammonia. Their air is made out of ammonia instead of oxygen, which, if you don't know, is highly toxic to humans in large quantities. Which is why throughout the remainder of the novel, we have complex tunnel systems and enclosures, allowing the two to interact without putting either in danger, for the most part. Now, they do a really great job of this in the audiobook, but Rocky's language is pretty much just musical notes in what seems to us as a random order. So him and Grace have to find a way to translate their language, which is a very slow process. They start with kind of a shared knowledge of math and science, considering they are both in spaceships in the middle of space. He assumes that there must be a base understanding of both subjects, and they kind of work their way up from there. In the beginning, we hear the musical notes, and then we hear Grace's translation. And then as it goes on, they give him kind of a voice in the same tone as the musical notes, but we can actually hear what he's saying in English, which represents Grace's increased understanding of the language. We learn that Rocky is also the sole survivor of his mission, and that his species from the planet Arid sent a ship for the same reason that Earth did. Their sun is dying too. And what stands out most about Rocky at this point, and as we learn more about him, is not just his intelligence, although he is a literal genius, is his strong personality. He is curious, proud, emotional, very loyal, and honestly hilarious. And against all odds, Grace is no longer alone. He has someone to face this journey with. Being on a tight timeline, they start working together immediately. They share scientific knowledge, theories, pretty much anything that gets them closer to reaching their goal. Rocky introduces the material xenonite, which is an impossibly strong metal, which helps his ship to stand strong in very extreme conditions. And using xenonite, they are actually able to work together on Grace's ship in order to save time and not having to go back and forth all of the time between ships, which is only possible because the material is so strong that it can actually hold in the high pressure in ammonia, which with any other metal, it would literally explode. With them also both being scientists facing an alien species, they are extremely curious. So they share facts about their home planet, their biology, etc. And something that I really appreciate is that Andy Weir really put in a lot of work to make their biology extremely different. It's not like, oh, I'm an alien, so I'm just blue and I work mostly the same, but I have these little quirks. Like, it is extremely different. Rocky has no eyes, no mouth. Sleep is a bonding activity, and he requires someone to watch him while he is sleeping, while eating is a private activity because it is extremely vulgar, almost. He basically opens up the bottom of his carapace and consumes food that way. It's very interesting. I won't go into too many details, but I do recommend that you look it up. Not that there's videos, just I recommend that you look up the process. He is also extremely blunt and straight to the point in a way that is hilarious, and it makes all of their interactions so entertaining. Their friendship forms fast, and the connection and understanding that they have with one another just feels so natural. One, because they're literally stranded in space, trauma bonded, trying to solve like the world's greatest mystery. And two, just because they have natural chemistry and banter that made the story come alive. So through all of their research, they are able to figure out why Tau Ceti has not dimmed. On one of its planets, they are able to find a natural predator of astrophage, and they name it Talmiba. And this discovery is a huge breakthrough, because Talmiba completely eats through astrophage, and if they are able to find a way to control it and transport it, then it could literally save both Arid and Earth. However, collecting the samples is very complex and very dangerous. They determined that the Talmiba lives approximately 10 kilometers into the surface of Adrian. However, their ship literally cannot fly that low because it will burn up in the atmosphere. So they come up with a plan to create what is essentially a xenonite chain to swoop down and collect some samples. So essentially the Hail Mary needs to slow down, otherwise the line will vaporize. And they have to maintain altitude, otherwise they will go too low and they will die. And they also have to be at enough of an angle so that they can thrust away from the chain, otherwise it will burn up and it will all be for nothing. Easy, right? Now, the chain that they're working on requires 200,000 links and literally took 2 weeks to make. Again, this is a very time-sensitive mission. However, eventually they finish and they are able to collect the samples. Then Grace has to fetch the samples from outside of the ship, and while he's doing that, the ship suddenly malfunctions and starts thrusting in the wrong direction. So he is literally on the outside of the ship, struggling in order to get to the airlock so that he can right the ship and fix it, otherwise they will, die. There is a huge malfunction, and we realize that one of the fuel tanks has been breached, and we eject it, but that does not solve the problem, and it is increasingly getting worse. So at random, he just ejects another fuel tank, which does work, but the force has caused the ship to now spin excessively, which is kind of creating a centrifugal force very similar to that spinny ride at the fair that attaches you to the wall. That is the situation that Grace is in now, and he is literally being crushed under the pressure, and we're sitting here thinking that this is it. There's no way for him to survive this, and as he's slowly accepting this, he looks over and sees that Rocky has actually exited his container in order to save him. As we established, oxygen is toxic to Rocky. He cannot survive in those conditions, so he pretty much saves Grace and immediately shuts down, and before he stops moving, he tells Grace that he must save Arid and Earth. Now Grace is finally able to regain control over the ship, and seeing Rocky lying there still makes him panic, but he thinks maybe there's a chance that he will be okay. So he opens up the airlock in order to get Rocky back into his enclosure, and doing so releases ammonia into his chamber, and he suffers burns and he can't see and he's coughing. And before he passes out, he asks the robot arms to please help. When he finally wakes up, he is desperate to help Rocky, but first he must check on the samples, considering this is what they both just risked their lives for. And once he gets them secure, he comes up with a plan to essentially shoot high-pressured air into Rocky's carapace. After some experimentation, he is able to build a contraption that is able to fit into Rocky's enclosure without harming either of them. And he shoots the air into him, and up comes like dust and soot, so he continues to do that for quite a bit. And later, whenever Rocky wakes up, because yes, thank God he does wake up, we learn that this is actually a huge mistake. All of that dust and soot was essentially the Iridian version of a scab. It was covering his body and allowing him to heal, so huge mistake. Grace feels horrible, but luckily they are both okay and able to heal. And now that they are both awake and okay, they are able to finally start fully experimenting with the Talmiba samples. And at first this feels like a miracle. It feels like the perfect solution. This is a natural predator that eats astrophage, and that could literally solve everybody's problems. However, in true Project Hail Mary fashion, things very quickly begin to go wrong. If you'll remember from earlier, astrophage contains a whole lot of energy, and this is what is powering both Rocky and Grace's ships. And what they have just brought on board is something that eats astrophage. Can you guess where we are going with this? The Talmiba is able to escape, and it eats through a ton of astrophage in record time. Like, these things essentially eat and multiply until there is no astrophage left on Grace's ship. And the way that we learn that this has happened is that pretty much the whole ship shuts down, which is of course amazing. What's scary about that? So the whole entire Hail Mary is basically offline. And the good thing about Rocky's ship is that it is filled with tons and tons and tons of astrophage. They have plenty left over for both of their ships to be able to potentially even get home. The bad thing is that they can't get it because Hail Mary is completely offline. And one thing about Rocky is that he is actually more of an engineer than he is a scientist. He's amazing at math and he knows science, but his real skill is that he can build pretty much anything. So he is able to build a backup generator. And using one of the Beetles, which was filled with astrophage, they were able to get enough fuel in order to get things moving again. So now that we're moving again, they are able to do more experimentation, and they learned that Talmiba can survive anywhere from negative 180 degrees Celsius to around 107 degrees Celsius. They require at least a little bit of carbon dioxide in order to survive, but nitrogen will kill them, which Earth and arid, oxygen and ammonia are full of nitrogen. So they must now breed nitrogen-resistant Talmiba, and they're able to do so using xenonite enclosures. Now, we are getting closer and closer to our solution. With Talmiba 35, we have a strand that is 3.5% resistant, which makes it safe for Earth. But for arid, we need a strand that is 8% resistant. So we are getting closer and closer to our time of departure. All we have to do is create a couple more strands of Talmiba and we will be good to go. Rocky ends up asking Grace for a laptop as a parting gift. He is absolutely fascinated with Earth's superior technology. And in exchange, Grace asks for some xenonite in liquid and solid form because it will just absolutely transform technologies on Earth. Now, throughout all of this, the Hail Mary is still being patched and cleaned and completely sterilized from the Talmiba outbreak. He is unable to get all of the Talmiba completely out of Fuel Bay 5, so he ends up jettisoning it, which would be fine, except for the less fuel he has, the longer it will take for him to get home. Now, this is not just an issue of not being able to go back into a coma or being bored, although that is a huge issue because insanity through isolation is a real thing. There's also an issue of food. He only has a 43-month supply, and Rocky's food is made completely of metals and therefore is highly toxic to Grace. He is, of course, not happy about this. He has built up all this hope at maybe being able to go home, and that hope is kind of slowly being crushed. However, Rocky is able to build him a replacement fuel tank made out of aluminum because these things don't need to necessarily be that strong. They just need to be able to hold astrophage. Finally, they are able to create 8% resistant Talmiba, and their job is pretty much over aside from getting home. Grace finds a bottle of vodka, and Rocky puts on a very interesting celebratory outfit, and they take a well-deserved break. They find a way to place the Talmiba samples into the Beetles and direct one of them to fly to Arid in case anything happens. And Rocky is able to transport some more of his astrophage into Ryland's ship. Their departure is very sad. As we all know, humans have an average life expectancy of around 80, 90 years old, whereas the average lifespan for Euridian is almost 700, with some of them living even longer. So Rocky tells Grace that they should visit each other, and we are sadly reminded that he likely will not live long enough in order for that to happen. This is their final goodbye. This is months of friendship and hard work and sacrifice, and it is about to all be over. They're gonna go home and live their separate life. They do their final calculations and their final goodbyes, and they are off for home. Now, one thing that I wasn't really talking about while focusing on Rocky and Grace was everything that had happened in his flashbacks. Like I said, these flashbacks take place pretty much throughout the whole entire book. This is how we piece together where we are, why we are, what our purpose is, who we are, etc. These flashbacks are extremely important. And the main character of these flashbacks is Eva Stratt. Eva Stratt is a powerful, globally connected European administrator who is well known for her efficiency and no-nonsense attitude. The world has basically decided that this is the best person to spearhead the Petrova task force. They know that she will get shit done. And she's not a scientist herself, but she does understand enough about science to be able to employ all of the best experts in the world. This is the kind of woman where she can snap her fingers and basically have any single figurehead in the world at her disposal. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the novel, she basically recruits Grace to the Petrova task force due to his theory that organisms can exist without water. Life can exist without water. She kind of uses him as a disposable dummy to test whether or not astrophage is going to be lethal to humanity. And once she realizes that astrophage does in fact have water, she kicks him to the curb. He has to beg to be able to work on this project. And the only reason he does so is because he goes back to his life and he looks into the faces of his middle schoolers and he thinks, if there's a way that I can solve this problem and keep these people from facing catastrophe, I'm going to. So Stratt allows him to join this mission, and being the first person to really study and understand astrophage, she deems him the head scientist for the project pretty much. And we see as they go and work with all of the top scientists, all of the nations, all of the best technology in order to create the plan for Project Hail Mary. Now, they decide that the ship will have 3 crew members consisting of the best scientists, astronauts in the world who are also resistant to dying from a medically induced coma. They know that the trip will be very long and very dangerous, and they need the best chances of their scientists surviving that trip. So there is the 3 primary crew and the 3 backup crew, and it is determined that these crew members should never be in the same place at the same time when traveling or when doing any major experiments. However, they do have training together. And on a day very close to launch day, there is a huge incident at the lab where a ginormous miscalculation is made and it results in a huge explosion, which kills Dr. Martin Dubois, the primary scientist specialist, and Dr. Annie Shapiro, the secondary science specialist. And on such short notice, Stratt decides that the only possible person in order to fill their place is Dr. Ryland Grace. Now, Grace was more than happy to do his part in research, in development, in anything on the ground that needed to be done. He was more than happy to be there and participate. However, he has a very strong attachment to his life, essentially. He knows that this is a suicide mission and he does not want to participate. However, once Stratt has determined that Grace is indispensable, that's kind of the end of it. She has decided that it doesn't really matter what use he serves on the mission. The crew needs 3 people, here's a 3rd person. They don't have time to test and fit and train another person. And having all of the power that she has, she essentially kidnaps him, drugs him, signs consent forms on his behalf, and erases his memory so that whenever he wakes up, he won't have any idea what has happened. Stratt believes that one man's autonomy is essentially irrelevant whenever it could result in saving all of humanity. Her philosophy is that history will be based on the outcomes, not on the methods of getting there. And Stratt, knowing Grace, erased his memories very purposefully so that he would wake up confused but ready to participate. He wouldn't wake up angry and wanting to sabotage the mission. She knew that by the time he regained his memory, he would be so invested that he would not interfere. We wake up alone, confused, and without our memories. We slowly gain them back. We work for months on this mission. We find friendship, we face challenges, and we overcome them, and ultimately we find a solution. And on his way home, Grace is restored his final memory of realizing that it was never his choice, that he tried to refuse, and that he was essentially betrayed. Throughout the book, he has had this idea that he's a hero. Yes, he's in a tough position, but he must be a good, brave man to have volunteered for such a mission. He must be following his own moral code. He must be doing this because he truly believed in the mission. He truly believed that he could be the one to do this. We believe this throughout the whole entire book until finally it comes crashing down all around us and he is devastated, not only because he realizes that his autonomy was stripped from him, but also because he realizes that at his core, he is a coward. He is not a selfless hero. He is someone who is faced with a hard decision and ran. And in the midst of this realization and spiral, he realizes that he is facing another Talmiba infection, but this time he is alone. He works to run all of the necessary experiments, and he sets up a Talmiba alarm because his biggest fear is that it is going to get into the fuel tanks again and that he is going to be stranded. And ultimately, he is extremely confused. He doesn't understand how this outbreak is happening considering how careful they were. And he starts to wonder if there's any way that the Talmiba is getting through the Xenonite. And with his experimentation, he learns that it absolutely is. While Xenonite is an effective barrier for pretty much any other substance, and while it effectively contains the regular Talmiba, it cannot contain Talmiba 85, which is the 8.5% resistant Talmiba that was sent to Arid. He realizes that in all of their breeding, they used Xenonite enclosures, and essentially the Talmiba evolved to find a way to hide and pass through the Xenonite because life will always find a way. It's not going to just willingly let you kill it, essentially. Now, for Grace, his solution is pretty simple. He can just transport the Talmiba into a non-Xenonite container. However, he realizes that Rocky, whose entire ship is made of Xenonite, is not going to have the solution available. Knowing this, Grace is left with an option. He has a choice this time. He can either fly home unexpectedly and be greeted as a hero, or he can turn around and sacrifice his own life in order to save Rocky and to save Arid. He knows that if he turns around, there is no way that he will be able to survive on Arid. The air is extremely hostile, he will have no food, he will die. But he knows what he has to do. With the Blip A having no fuel, it is a little bit difficult, but he is finally able to locate it and he sets course for the ship. It has been 3 months since they parted, and Rocky has been stranded in this ship that essentially just does not work, and now he has to find a way to communicate with him from his ship in order to catch his attention. Once he gets his attention, they build another tunnel and they are reunited, and it is so emotional and hopeful, and Rocky is just overjoyed that his friend has come back for him. And being the little genius that he is, he actually ends up finding a solution for Ryland. Rocky reassures Grace that his people will supply him with the astrophage needed to return home, but again we run into the issue that there is not enough food. Rocky suggests that he eats Arid's food, but as we know, it is made of metals and is highly toxic. And then he suggests that Ryland might be able to eat Talmiba, which just might work. Grace arrives on Arid, and with Rocky's help, he survives. Life is difficult and the gravity is brutal and the conditions are hostile, but the Arid people are very willing to work together to help the man who essentially assisted in their salvation. Years pass and Grace becomes a teacher again. This time he is teaching Iridian children science and problem solving, and he is getting to live out his passion. And he gets to have a little bit of normalcy in his new life. But one day, Rocky brings Grace the message that they have been waiting for. The beetle made it to Earth, the Talmiba worked, Sun recovered, and humanity was saved. Grace never ends up going back to Earth, but he does live out his life on Arid, and he knows that his mission was a success. This book does not end with the certain death or the big triumphant parades that we might have expected, but it does end with the certainty of knowing that everything is going to be okay. Grace saved the world, and he did not do it alone. So now that you've essentially read the book, let's go into a character deep dive. Now, Ryland Grace is not your typical hero. He does not wake up with a clear objective in mind, ready to save the world. Instead, he wakes up very scared, very confused, and his mission is very much to just not die. At his core, he is a survivor before a hero, and when things go wrong, his first instinct is curiosity. He pokes at things, he experiments, he does what he needs to do in order to find the answers. And when things go wrong, he cracks jokes and he is just as sarcastic as the rest of us. And the most important thing about Grace's story is that he never signs up for this mission. He is literally dragged into it kicking and screaming. And his arc is not about becoming fearless, but about regaining his autonomy and having the ability to choose for himself. Through his flashbacks, he is able to get a kind of perspective that none of us probably have. He sees who he is and he knows what he has to do in order to change. When Grace turns back for Rocky, it is the first moment where he is choosing his own fate. Not because somebody forced him or because it is logical, but because he cares and he knows that it is the right thing to do. Now, Rocky is probably my favorite character of all time across pretty much every genre. Me and every other reader in the world probably fell in love with him. However, whenever we are first introduced to him, it is extremely uncertain. We have no clue who he is, what his intentions are, and how this is going to turn out. However, within only a few chapters, he becomes the emotional heart of the whole entire story. Without him, I don't think that this story could support itself in the same way. He is absolutely brilliant, but not in a cold or a distant way, but in a way that is very direct and literal. He is fast, he's intuitive, he's wildly competent, and he is a literal genius when it comes to engineering. And then there's the humor aspect of it. He is so funny, sometimes on purpose and sometimes not on purpose, but his blunt honesty, his enthusiastic reactions, and his complete lack of social pretenses make him absolutely hilarious. There are so many quotable Rocky lines. And his physical presence makes this even better. He is a giant rock spider space monster, essentially. But he is about the size of a small dog, and he triggers the strongest possible response from the audience of needing to protect him at all cost. And their friendship is so strong. They teach each other how each other's worlds work, they save each other during emergencies, and they trust each other with their lives. Kind of because they have to, and kind of because they just can't help it. This friendship feels fated because while it could just be a mutual alliance based on necessity, it is so much more than that. How could two beings from two completely different planets with completely different biology and understandings of the world come together and fit so seamlessly as a duo? They don't understand each other's biology or culture, but they understand what matters. They understand effort, they understand loyalty, and they understand how much it can matter just to have somebody with you whenever things get hard. And this is why the ending works so well and why it is so emotional and hard-hitting while being completely realistic. Now let's get into Stratt. Eva Stratt is not a villain, okay? She is not evil at her core, but she is the antagonist. She was put in charge of the Petrova task force because of her ability to be logical over emotional, and this is exactly what ends up betraying Grace. She believes that if humanity is going to survive, we cannot focus too much on any single individual. And to her credit, this does include herself. Her actions are completely brutal. She coerces Grace into her project, erases his consent, and prioritizes outcomes over people. However, the story never paints her as careless. She understands the cost of every single decision that she makes, and she accepts that when everything is said and done, she is going to be judged for them. She accepts that she has made completely ruthless calls, and she expects to spend the rest of her life in prison. And she's okay with that. She believes that as long as the world is saved, it is all worth it. Her role is important because it shows what happens whenever we act without compassion and whenever we pursue survival over everything else. And it also kind of shows the complex range of ethics and how much that can differ from person to person. In the end, Grace is able to succeed not because he bends to her philosophy and ends up following it, but because he rejects it. His final choice is made with so much compassion that it stands in direct contrast to her character in a way that makes them both more complex and more interesting characters. I do not agree with Dr. Eva Stratt, but I do understand her and how complex she is, and I am praying that the movie gets this right. And with the mention of the movie, I just want to throw out some of my favorite quotes that I hope actually make it onto the big screen. So whenever they first meet, Rocky doesn't completely understand sarcasm, and their back and forth banter is just so funny to me. And this quote goes like this. He says, "Work fast." "Yeah," I point at the screen. "First I have to wait for my computer to wake up." "Hurry." "Okay, I'll wait faster." Sarcasm. Something that is so funny about Rocky is that he won't be like, "Oh, you're being sarcastic." He just goes, "Sarcasm." And he's like, "Yeah, that was sarcastic. Thanks for catching on." It's just funny, like the way he delivers his lines, hilarious. If you are going to read this book, I do recommend listening to the audio because the way that they voice him is so perfect. Now, an ongoing bit between Grace and Rocky is that Grace tells him to fist bump, and this becomes an ongoing joke because Rocky cannot seem to get the wording right. The thing about the way that words are spoken in Arid, they're spoken kind of opposite to English. So he puts his claw against the divider. "Fist my bump." Fist bump. It's just fist bump. Understand. He does not, in fact, understand.
Fist my bump. No, it's fist bump.
Another scenario that arises is that humans have to sleep much, much more than Iridians do. And once he understands this, he goes to Grace. "Grumpy, angry, stupid. How long since last sleep? Question." He goes, "Usually you not stupid. Why stupid? Question." So he ends every sentence with question because the way that they speak, they can't be like, "You're usually not stupid. Why are you being stupid?" The way that they speak, it's all in one tone. So they say question at the end of every question in order to indicate the difference in tone. "Grumpy, angry, stupid. How long since last sleep?" He said, "You're tired, go to bed." My absolute favorite quote from this whole entire book is whenever they're having a conversation and Grace says something essentially along the lines of, "Some people might think that you were pretty scary looking." And Rocky shoots back, "Good, proud. I am scary space monster. You are leaky space blob." Like, okay. And one of my other favorite quotes from the book that I just found really funny at the time is just Grace. It's whenever he's remembering that he is a school teacher, but he remembers the kids before he remembers his occupation. And he goes, "So I'm a single man in my 30s who lives alone in a small apartment. I don't like where this is going. A school teacher. I'm a school teacher. Oh, thank God I'm a teacher." Because he remembers, he's like, something, something, something. "Oh, the kids. I like kids. I don't have kids. Why do I like kids? Oh, thank God I'm a school teacher." Like, that's just, it's so funny. Like, that split-second moment where he was like, "Am I a bad person?" There are so many quotes like that throughout this book. Like I said, this book is just so sarcastic and blunt and quick with it and witty, and I enjoyed it so much. So, if they could include even a handful of those quotes into the movie, I will be so happy because in my opinion the dialogue is already perfect. I'm really hoping that the script is pretty much just straight from page to screen. Now I think that I would have been excited for this adaptation no matter what. However, I do think that it is a very well timed story. I think that with the way that the world is going, audiences are kind of a little bit tired of dreary apocalyptic stories. I think that at this point in time they might just hit a little bit too close to home. So therefore having this kind of dramatic, high stakes, almost apocalyptic story be so hopeful and to actually have success at the end, humanity is saved, another planet is saved, I think that that is the kind of stories that we are all hoping for right now, because at the moment a lot of us just want the chance and the hope that everything is going to be okay. It has humor and it has emotional heart, but it respects science and it shows a story where nations come together in order to solve a problem, and it just works in a way that is hopeful without feeling naive, which I think we all really need right now. And I'm really, really hopeful that they are going to get it right. And part of that is because of the casting. Ryland Grace is being played by Ryan Gosling, and I love Ryan Gosling. Grace is not an action hero. He is awkward and anxious and sarcastic and unwilling, and he is constantly monologuing himself through his own panic, and I think that Ryan Gosling is going to do such a good job at bringing this to life. I think that Gosling can play funny, emotional, complex characters very well, and if he leans into the awkwardness and the reluctance side of things, I think that he is going to make a very good fit. And then we have the very important casting of our antagonist, and Sandra Huller as Eva Stratt. And I've never seen any movies with Sandra Huller in them. However, from what I could gather, she definitely has what it takes in order to play Stratt correctly. Stratt needs to be commanding and intimidating, but she's not cartoonishly evil. She is calm and authoritative and emotionally distant and completely willing to make hard decisions. And from what I can tell, Huller does a really good job with characters who can command a room quietly and who don't need to raise their voice to be intimidating. Stratt needs to feel like an unstoppable force, but she is not a straight up villain. I think that depending on how she is portrayed, it will make or break the message of the whole entire story. And finally, we have my literal bestie, Rocky. We don't really have any information on how he's going to be portrayed. There's very limited showing of him in the trailer. I don't even think that we hear his voice in the trailer. So they are keeping this very under wraps, but depending on how they play him, it will completely change how this movie goes. His character is so very, very, very important, and them being able to get his personality right is extremely important. In my opinion, more so than any of the other characters. He needs to be able to feel alien and foreign without coming across as cartoonishly so. He also needs to be expressive and funny and emotionally readable without having any kind of face for us to go off of. If he's too goofy, then we're going to lose all of the heart. And if he's too serious, then we're going to lose that dynamic between him and Grace. And if they get him wrong, I will be heartbroken because I love him so, so much. And I know that all of the fans of this book feel the same way. Now, this book has become quite a phenomenon all on its own. It has strong sales, constant recommendations, and a very devoted fan base that I think are all holding their breaths to see how this movie turns out. This is one of those adaptations where fans aren't just hoping that it's good or being like, oh, it'll be so fun to see this movie on screen. People are emotionally invested that this movie has the same heart and message that the book does. So depending on how this goes, the fan response and the cultural impact will be very, very interesting to dive into. Now, all that being said, if you like reading, I do still very much recommend that you read the book. While I tried to go as in-depth as possible, this is only one video, and I do think that the book holds so much emotional weight, and it is just so entertaining as well. I highly recommend that you pick it up still. However, if you do want to go in with just this video, that totally works too. Just know that this is not going to be a non-stop action movie. While things are constantly going wrong and there are lots of challenges that come up, in my opinion, it is the quiet moments and the problem solving and the conversations and relationship between Rocky and Grace that are going to make this great. Be emotional and curious, and remember that saving the world is not the true point of Project Hail Mary. It is about compassion, curiosity, and cooperation, and making hard decisions even when it is going to cost you everything. If the movie is able to get this right, then I think that it is truly going to be something special that we will look back on for decades to come. If you've read it, let me know which moments hit you the hardest, and if you haven't, that's okay too. I'm sure we'll all still be in the theater crying together. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful, and I will see y'all next week. Bye.